The lone cowboy didn't want a family, until a freezing Apache widow with her baby changed his life. He had been traveling for days, moving from one small town to another, never staying in one place for too long. This was the life he had chosen, or perhaps the life that had chosen him. There were no ties, no obligations, no one waiting for him anywhere. He liked it that way. Freedom, he thought, was all a man really needed. He had learned long ago that attachments brought pain. His parents had died when he was a boy, leaving him to survive on his own. He remembered the cold nights when he had slept under the stars, clutching a thin blanket, wishing someone would return for him. He had learned to fend for himself, and in doing so, he had built a life of solitude. He was tough, self-reliant, and cautious. He trusted no one easily and let no one close. That was the way of the frontier, he reminded himself. You could not afford weakness in a world full of danger. As he rode, he scanned the horizon. Small towns dotted the land like distant islands, but he never lingered. He entered a town only long enough to rest his horse, gather supplies, and perhaps share a quiet drink with strangers. The townspeople respected him, though many whispered about the lone cowboy who moved like a shadow through their streets. He had a reputation as a skilled marksman and a fearless rider. People admired him from afar, but no one truly knew him. He preferred it that way. At night, he would set up camp wherever he found shelter. Sometimes it was under a cluster of trees, other times in a small cave or against the side of a hill. He would start a fire, careful to keep it small and hidden. He cooked whatever game he had hunted that day, the smell of roasted meat blending with the crisp night air. Often he would sit by the fire, staring into the flames, thinking about nothing and everything at once. He liked the silence. It allowed him to breathe, to feel the pulse of the land, and to remember the lessons he had learned about life and survival. But not every moment was comfortable or easy. The plains could be harsh and unforgiving. Storms would come without warning, bringing freezing rain, lightning, and wind that cut through his coat. He had learned to respect the weather, to read the sky for signs of danger, and to trust his instincts. One winter, he had been caught in a blizzard that lasted 3 days. He had found shelter in a hollowed-out tree and survived on the small amount of food he had packed. He had learned that nature could be as deadly as any outlaw or wild animal. Yet, despite the hardships, he loved the land. The plains were his home, wide and endless, offering a freedom that no town or family ever could. Sometimes, as he rode, he would see other people, travelers, families, and children playing in the distance. He would watch them from afar, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and distance. He saw the way a mother would comfort her child, how a father would guide his son or daughter through the chores of the day. For a moment, he felt a pang of longing, a flicker of something he had long buried, but he would push it away. Such connections were dangerous. People could be lost in an instant, and he could not bear to be hurt again. He had built walls around his heart, tall and strong, and he intended to keep them there. Even in the towns, he kept to himself. He would buy supplies quietly, often avoiding conversation. When people asked about his travels, he gave only short, simple answers. He had no interest in sharing his past, and he certainly had no interest in forming attachments. The bartender in one town once asked him why he never stayed in one place. He had shrugged and said, "This is where I need to be." It was true. He needed to be free. He needed to roam the land, to feel the wind on his face, and to know that he could survive on his own. Despite his solitary life, there were moments when he felt something he could not name. He would sometimes sit by a river, watching the reflection of the sky in the water. He noticed families fishing together, laughing and talking. He remembered the warmth of his own family, fleeting as it had been. He felt a quiet ache, a reminder that he was human, that he had once known love, and that he might have wanted it again. But he quickly shook the thought away. There was no room for that in his life, he told himself firmly. Love and family meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant danger. He was careful to avoid attachment even in small ways. He would give coins to children in the towns or offer a drink of water to a weary traveler, but he never lingered. He never let them see too much of himself. He had learned the hard way that kindness did not have to come with intimacy. He could be compassionate without becoming entangled in someone else's life. That was the code he lived by, and he followed it strictly. The nights were often the hardest. Alone under the stars, with only the fire and the sounds of the night around him, he sometimes felt a strange emptiness. The loneliness was a constant companion, though he never admitted it to himself. He told himself that he preferred solitude, and for the most part he did. Yet, in rare quiet moments, he wondered what it would be like to have someone to share a meal with, someone to talk to about the small details of life, or even someone to watch the sunset with. But he quickly pushed the thoughts aside. Such dreams were dangerous distractions. He had friends once long ago, but they had all moved on or died. He had learned that attachments were fleeting. The land was the only constant, and it never asked anything of him except respect. He respected the land and its rules. He respected its beauty, its danger, and its freedom. And in return, it gave him everything he needed: solitude, purpose, and the endless horizon to ride toward. As he rode deeper into the plains that evening, the sky turned a pale shade of orange and pink. The sun was setting, and the world seemed to glow with a quiet serenity. He paused, allowing his horse to slow to a walk. For a moment, he felt a sense of peace that he rarely experienced. The plains were vast, silent, and endless. He could ride forever and never meet another soul. That was the life he had chosen, and it suited him perfectly. And yet, somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of self-reliance and caution, there was a small, quiet voice. It whispered of connection, of warmth, of family. He ignored it as he always had. But that night, as he set up camp under a lone tree, he stared into the fire and wondered, just for a moment, what it would be like if things were different. What would it feel like to have someone depend on him? To have someone to protect, to care for, and to share the quiet moments of life? The cowboy shook his head, returning his focus to the fire. The wind howled across the plains, carrying the scent of snow and frost. He tightened his coat and climbed into his bedroll, letting the warmth of the fire linger in his thoughts. Tomorrow would bring another day of riding, another day of solitude, and another day of freedom. He told himself he was content, and in many ways he was. The land was his companion, the horse his partner, and the open plains his home. But deep inside, in a quiet corner of his heart, a tiny spark had begun to stir, a spark that would not stay hidden forever. The cowboy did not yet know it, but his life, carefully built around solitude and independence, was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. And when that change came, it would challenge everything he believed about freedom, love, and what it truly meant to live. The next morning, the cowboy woke to a sky painted in soft shades of gray. Frost covered the ground, and his horse's breath came out in thick, misty clouds. The wind had dropped, leaving an uneasy calm over the plains. He packed his few belongings, saddled his horse, and began riding. His path was the same as always: open plains stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted here and there by twisted trees and rocky outcrops. He had ridden for hours, his thoughts wandering as they often did, when the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the temperature dropped sharply. The first flakes of snow fell, light and delicate, then heavier and faster, until the plains were soon covered in a thick, sparkling white layer. The cowboy's instincts told him to find shelter. The storm had arrived suddenly, faster than he had expected, and it was already too dangerous to remain exposed. Scanning the horizon, he spotted a small clearing surrounded by low hills. It was not much, but it offered some protection from the wind. He guided his horse carefully through the snow, the animal's hooves crunching against the frozen ground. As he approached the clearing, something unusual caught his eye. A faint figure, barely visible against the white snow, struggled across the field. The cowboy squinted, trying to see more clearly. It was a woman, crouched low, her head wrapped in a thin shawl, holding a small bundle close to her chest. He slowed his horse and watched. The figure seemed weak and exhausted, moving with difficulty through the snow. He could see the edges of the bundle moving slightly, as if something inside was alive and stirring. His heart, which had long been guarded, responded in a way that startled him. He had always avoided attachments, always avoided responsibility, but he could not ignore someone in such clear need. The cowboy guided his horse closer, calling out in a low, calm voice, "Hey, you all right there?" The baby inside stirred, crying softly. The cowboy dismounted carefully, his boots crunching in the snow. He approached slowly, making no sudden movements, letting her see he meant no harm. I can help," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "You shouldn't be out here in this storm. Please don't leave us." Her words were desperate but not demanding. They carried the quiet strength of someone who had survived much already. The cowboy hesitated. He had spent his life avoiding responsibility, avoiding attachment. Yet something in her eyes and the way she held the baby so protectively reached a part of him he had long ignored. Slowly, he nodded and knelt beside her. "All right. Come with me, we'll find some shelter." The woman lowered the baby gently onto a blanket the cowboy had taken from his saddlebag. The infant's small face was red from the cold, and he let out another soft cry. The cowboy removed his coat and draped it over the baby, shielding it from the wind. The woman watched him, a mixture of relief and surprise on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. She had clearly been alone for a long time, and the simple act of kindness struck her deeply. As the storm raged outside, they sat near the fire. The cowboy offered her some bread and dried meat he had in his pack. She accepted it gratefully, though she did not speak much. The baby, comforted by warmth and food, began to quiet, falling into a fitful sleep. The cowboy watched, his hands warming over the fire, and for the first time in many years he allowed himself to feel a sense of care for someone other than himself. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of easing. The cowboy and the widow exchanged small words, tentative at first, learning each other's presence in silence and cautious conversation. She told him her name was Aeon and that she had been traveling alone with her baby after losing her husband in a raid. Her voice was calm, steady, though tinged with sadness. She had lived through hardship, yet she did not ask for pity. She only asked for help. The cowboy listened quietly, offering the occasional nod or short reply. He did not share his own story, though fragments of his past flickered through his mind. He had been alone for so long that the idea of opening up felt strange and dangerous. Yet, as he watched Aeon tend to her baby, he felt something shift within him. He began to realize that perhaps some things were worth the risk, some connections worth pursuing, even if they brought vulnerability. As night fell, the storm continued to rage. The snow fell thickly, covering the ground in a pure white blanket. The cowboy set up a small shelter with his tarp and blankets, ensuring that Aeon and the baby were as protected as possible. He built the fire higher, letting the flames provide warmth and light. He kept a careful watch, his instincts honed from years on the plains. Danger could come in many forms: wild animals, the storm itself, or even desperate people. But tonight his focus was on keeping them safe. Aeon watched him, a quiet admiration in her eyes. She had encountered many people in her life, but few had shown the patience, skill, and calm determination that he possessed. He did not ask for thanks, nor did he expect it. He simply acted. That was what impressed her most. She sensed that beneath his rough exterior lay a heart capable of great care, though it had been hidden for too long. The cowboy noticed her gaze but said nothing. He was aware of the growing bond, though he tried to suppress it. He told himself it was temporary, that once the storm ended, he would continue his journey alone. He had no intention of being tied down. Yet each time he looked at the baby, swaddled in his coat, or at Aeon, tending with quiet patience, he felt a stirring in his chest he had not felt in years. Through the long night they remained by the fire. The cowboy shared small stories of his travels, of the plains, of the towns he had passed through. Aeon listened quietly, occasionally adding her own observations about the land and the harshness of winter. Conversation was sparse, yet it built a bridge between them, a connection formed in shared survival and mutual respect. As the hours passed, the storm began to ease. The snow slowed to a gentle fall and the wind softened. The cowboy stepped outside, looking at the vast expanse of white. It was quiet now, serene, almost peaceful. He felt a sense of calm, knowing that for tonight they were safe. He turned back to the fire, to Aeon and the baby, and allowed himself to relax slightly. For the first time in a long while, he considered a future he had never imagined. He had always believed that solitude was his only companion, that freedom meant being alone. Yet here, in the middle of a snow-covered plain, he felt a warmth he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. It was not the fire, nor the meal, nor the shelter. It was the simple presence of another human being, and a child who depended on someone for survival. The night passed slowly but uneventfully. By morning, the sky was clear, and the sun glinted off the snow, making the plain sparkle like a field of diamonds. The cowboy, Aeon, and the baby prepared to continue their journey. The storm had passed, but the bond formed in those long, cold hours remained. They had survived together, and that shared experience had created something neither of them could ignore. As they mounted their horses and began to ride, the cowboy felt a strange sense of purpose. He had no name for it yet, no clear understanding of what lay ahead, but he knew that life had shifted in a way he could not reverse. He looked at Aeon, guiding her horse through the snow, and at the baby, bundled tightly and sleeping peacefully. In that moment, he realized that helping them had changed him. He had opened a door he had kept shut for years, a door that led to something unknown but potentially beautiful. The plains stretched before them, endless and white, but for the first time, the cowboy did not feel alone. He had always valued freedom above all else, but now he began to understand that sometimes, freedom was not just about being alone. Sometimes, freedom meant choosing to protect, to care, and to form a bond that made life richer and more meaningful. He did not yet know what the future held, but he knew he would not abandon them. He would ride with them through snow and storm and face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, the lone cowboy who had believed he wanted no family began a journey that would change his life forever. The storm had brought more than cold and snow. It had brought a chance, a spark, and the possibility of love in a form he had never imagined. The plain stretched endlessly before them, a vast sea of white under the winter sun. The snow crunched beneath the hooves of their horses, and the cold air made every breath visible. The cowboy rode at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon for danger. Aeon followed closely, holding her baby carefully, swaddled in blankets and warm clothing. Though the baby was quiet, the cowboy could feel the small, fragile heartbeat beneath his coat whenever he glanced back. The journey was harder than he had expected. The snow was deep in some areas, slowing their horses and making each step an effort. Ice hidden beneath the snow threatened to make the ground treacherous. They had to navigate carefully, choosing paths that would keep the horses safe while still moving forward. The cowboy took the lead, marking safe routes and teaching Aeon how to read the land as they traveled. For her part, Aeon was brave and resourceful. Though weak from exhaustion and hunger, she remained alert, helping guide the horse when the snow made footing difficult. She shared knowledge of plants that could be used for warmth and small meals, and how to recognize signs of nearby animals. The cowboy listened carefully, silently impressed by her intelligence and resilience. She had survived alone with a baby in harsh conditions, and she did so without complaint. Her strength was quiet but undeniable, and it began to shift the cowboy's understanding of what it meant to be brave. They camped each night under low, sheltered hills or behind clusters of rocks that broke the wind. The cowboy built fires and prepared simple meals, while Aeon tended to the baby. Each night, as the fire flickered and the snow whispered against their temporary shelter, they would sit close together. Conversation was sparse at first. They were learning one another's rhythms, sharing small words, small gestures of trust. The cowboy offered food to Aeon, adjusted the blankets around the baby, and sometimes, without thinking, brushed snow off her coat or hair. The baby began to recognize them both, smiling and cooing in the warmth of their care. Each laugh, each soft cry, pulled at the cowboy's heart in ways he had long denied existed. He caught himself imagining a life he had never allowed himself to dream of, a life with these two people, protected and cared for by him. He pushed the thoughts away, reminding himself of his vow to remain alone, yet he could not ignore the tug of something powerful and unfamiliar. The days were long and danger was never far away. Wolves sometimes howled in the distance, and one night the cowboy spotted a coyote near their camp. He kept his rifle close, ready to protect them if necessary. He did not say much, but Aeon could see the watchful concern in his eyes. She began to trust him more, recognizing the careful way he observed the world and the way he always put their safety first. One particularly cold evening, as the wind whipped snow across the plains, the baby began to cry uncontrollably. Aeon tried to soothe him, rocking him gently and singing soft words in her native tongue. The cowboy noticed that the baby's tiny hands were turning red from the cold. Without thinking, he took the child into his arms, pressing him close and wrapping him in his coat. He held the baby against his chest, feeling warmth flow between them. Aeon watched silently, her eyes misty, realizing that the cowboy had begun to care deeply, not just out of duty but from his own heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The cowboy did not reply immediately. He simply looked down at the baby, feeling the steady heartbeat and the warmth of life in his hands. In that quiet moment, he understood that he could no longer deny the bond that was forming. He had always believed that attachments brought pain, but he could feel now that attachments could also bring purpose, joy, and love. The journey continued, and as the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They shared stories of their pasts. Aeon spoke of her husband and the life they had built together before tragedy struck. The cowboy spoke little, but he shared memories of the plains, of the towns he had visited, and of the solitude that had defined him. He did not speak of the heartbreak he had buried deep inside, but his actions, his care, his patience, his unwavering attention spoke louder than words. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing rocks and hidden streams. They had to navigate carefully to avoid injuries to the horses or themselves. The cowboy taught Aeon how to guide the horse over tricky terrain, showing her how to watch for weak ground or hidden ice. She learned quickly, trusting his expertise and following his instructions with confidence. The trust between them deepened with each shared challenge. One morning they reached a narrow mountain pass, the snow thicker than ever and the wind sharper. The baby was restless and Aeon was exhausted. The cowboy noticed her struggle and offered to carry her pack while she led the horse with the baby. She hesitated, reluctant to burden him, but he insisted. "We are in this together," he said simply. His words, simple and unadorned, carried a weight she had not expected. They moved slowly through the pass, step by step. Halfway through, the baby began to shiver violently. Aeon panicked, unsure if he would be able to survive the cold. The cowboy quickly adjusted blankets, pressed the child closer to his chest, and kept moving forward. He whispered softly to the baby, his voice calm and steady, and soon the child's shivering eased. Aeon watched in awe, realizing how deeply the cowboy had changed. He was no longer just a solitary wanderer. He was a protector, willing to put himself at risk for their safety. As they descended from the pass, they encountered a small group of bandits near a frozen river. The bandits demanded food and supplies, their guns raised. The cowboy acted quickly, positioning himself in front of Aeon and the baby. He did not panic. He spoke firmly, warning the bandits to back off. When they hesitated, unsure of his determination, he moved with precision, keeping both Aeon and the baby out of harm's way. In the end, the bandits retreated and the cowboy exhaled slowly, his pulse still racing. Aeon held the baby tightly, realizing that without him, they would have been in grave danger. The experience left a lasting impression on both of them. Aeon's trust in the cowboy deepened, and the cowboy's sense of responsibility and connection grew stronger. He began to notice small joys in the baby's laughter, the warmth of shared meals, and the quiet conversations with Aeon by the fire. He started to understand that caring for others did not make him weak. It made him stronger, more complete. As the days turned into weeks, they encountered other travelers in small settlements. The cowboy's reputation as a skilled and fearless man preceded him, and people began to offer help or supplies when they learned of his journey with Aeon and her baby. The cowboy accepted some aid, always grateful, but never forgetting the lessons of self-reliance that had carried him this far. Aeon remained by his side, her respect and admiration for him growing with each passing day. One evening, as they camped near a frozen stream, the cowboy watched Aeon sing softly to her baby. The melody was gentle, almost hypnotic, carrying over the quiet landscape. He felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a feeling he had long denied. He realized that he cared for them not just as a duty but as a choice, as something he wanted. The thought startled him, but he could not ignore it. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life that included them, a life with family and connection. The baby reached for him, giggling and cooing. He lifted the child into his arms, holding him close. Aeon smiled, and the cowboy felt a sense of peace he had never known. He had always believed that he wanted to remain alone, but now he understood that love and responsibility were not chains. They were a gift, a source of strength, and a reason to face the harsh world with courage. By the time they reached the edge of the plains, the cowboy had changed in ways he could not have predicted. He was still cautious, still wary of danger, but he was no longer the solitary man he had once been. He had formed bonds that mattered, bonds that gave him purpose beyond survival. He had learned that life was not just about freedom and independence. It was also about connection, care, and the courage to open one's heart. The journey through the winter had tested them all, cowboy, widow, and child. But it had also brought them together in a way that nothing else could. They had faced cold, hunger, exhaustion, and danger, and they had survived because they relied on one another. Trust had grown into respect, and respect had begun to turn into something deeper, something neither of them had expected but both silently hoped for. And as they rode toward the safety of the next settlement, the cowboy looked at Aeon and her baby and felt something he had never felt before: hope. Hope that life could be more than solitude, that family could be chosen and cherished, and that love could exist even in the harshest, coldest places. The journey was far from over, but he knew, without doubt, that his life had been forever changed. The plains were brighter now, the snow beginning to melt under the warmth of the sun. The winds had calmed, and the trail ahead looked less threatening than it had for weeks. The cowboy led the way, steady and confident, though a new sense of awareness accompanied him. He no longer felt completely alone. Aeon rode beside him, the baby secure in her arms, and every glance he gave her reminded him of the bond they had built. The journey to the nearest settlement was shorter now, but that did not make it easier. The terrain was rough, with uneven hills and hidden patches of ice. They moved slowly, careful not to endanger the baby or their horses. Yet, the cowboy felt different with each step. The weight of responsibility no longer felt like a burden. It was a purpose, a reason to keep going, to protect those he had grown to care for deeply. As they rode, Aeon began to speak more openly about her life. She told him stories of her childhood in her village, about her parents and the lessons they had taught her. She spoke of her late husband with a mixture of sadness and pride, remembering the moments of joy they had shared. The cowboy listened silently, letting her words sink in. He felt a connection not only to her but also to the history and culture she carried with her. It was a new world for him, one filled with different customs, beliefs, and ways of seeing life. The baby cooed and laughed, reaching for the cowboy's hand whenever he passed by. He began to notice small details, the tiny fingers grasping his coat, the warmth of the child against his chest, the way the baby's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Each smile, each giggle pulled at him in ways he had never imagined. He found himself imagining a future, a life where they were together, safe and happy. It was a thought he had long avoided, but now it felt natural, even necessary. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of the settlement. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of people talking and working drifted through the crisp air. The cowboy felt a mix of relief and uncertainty. He had spent his life avoiding towns, fearing attachments, and rejecting community. But now, seeing Aeon and the baby, he realized he wanted to be part of something larger than himself. He wanted to belong. The townspeople watched them with curiosity. The cowboy's reputation had preceded him in some places, but most had only heard rumors of a lone man traveling the plains. Aeon introduced herself and the baby, explaining their journey and the storm that had nearly claimed them. The townspeople offered help, warm blankets, food, and a place to rest. The cowboy accepted some of it but remained careful, guiding them to a small cabin offered by a friendly settler. Inside the cabin, warmth and safety enveloped them. The cowboy set the baby down, letting him stretch and play on a soft rug. Aeon unpacked the blankets and arranged the small space with care, making it comfortable for the child. The cowboy watched quietly, noticing the way she moved, her patience, and the tender care she gave. He realized that he had never truly seen such strength and gentleness combined in a single person. For the first time, the cowboy allowed himself to speak more freely. He told Aeon about his childhood, about the loss of his parents and the long years of solitude he had chosen. He admitted the fears he had long carried, the fear of attachment, the fear of loss, and the fear of being needed. Aeon listened without judgment, her eyes filled with understanding. She shared her own fears, her doubts about trusting again after losing her husband, and her hopes for the future. As the days passed, life in the settlement became a rhythm. The cowboy helped with chores, repaired fences, and hunted for food when necessary. Aeon began to teach him about her culture, about the traditions and stories that shaped her people. The baby grew stronger each day, laughing and reaching for both of them, binding them together in a web of love and responsibility. The cowboy noticed the subtle ways he had changed. He was no longer focused solely on himself. He watched the sunrise with Aeon, helped the baby take his first unsteady steps, and found joy in the simplest moments, sharing a meal, laughing at the baby's antics, or simply sitting together in silence by the fire. These moments brought him a peace he had never known in all his years of solitude. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the cowboy and Aeon sat outside the cabin. The baby slept between them, wrapped in blankets. The cowboy felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. He looked at Aeon, seeing not just a companion, but someone who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. "I never thought I could care like this," he admitted softly, his voice carrying a mixture of wonder and honesty. "I never thought I could want a family. Sometimes it brings us exactly what we need, even when we least expect it." He had found it in the most unlikely place, with the most unexpected companions. Days turned into weeks, and the settlement began to feel like home. The cowboy no longer moved through life as a solitary figure. He had a purpose, a reason to wake each morning and face the day. He took care of the baby, guided Aeon through the challenges of winter chores, and began to envision a future filled with shared joy and mutual support. Neighbors noticed the change as well. The once lone cowboy was now part of a small, growing community. He offered help without hesitation, shared stories of survival, and began to teach others the skills he had mastered over years of wandering the plains. Aeon supported him, and together, they became a symbol of resilience and hope in a harsh, unpredictable world. One afternoon, as the baby toddled toward a small garden, the cowboy and Aeon laughed together, watching the child explore. He realized then that this was what he had been missing all along, not just freedom but connection, not just survival but love, not just solitude but family. He had found a new kind of freedom, one that included others, one that gave life meaning beyond his own needs. The cowboy knelt beside the baby, holding his tiny hands. "You're safe," he whispered, "and we're together now." Aeon placed a hand on his shoulder, and he felt a deep sense of belonging that he had never known. The baby laughed, and the sound filled the small cabin and the surrounding plains with warmth and light. As the seasons began to change, the cowboy continued to adapt to his new life. He still rode the plains occasionally, ensuring supplies and checking on distant lands, but he always returned. He had found a home, not in a place, but in the people who had come to mean everything to him. Aeon and the baby had transformed him, showing him that life's greatest rewards often came from opening one's heart. And so, the lone cowboy who had once sworn to never want a family had discovered a life richer than he had ever imagined. The freezing storm that had brought him to Aeon and her child had also brought warmth, purpose, and love. He had learned that family was not a burden but a gift. He had learned that courage was not only in facing the dangers of the plains, but also in embracing the responsibilities and joys of the heart. In the quiet evenings, as the sun set over the plains and painted the snow in shades of gold, the cowboy would sit by the fire, Aeon by his side, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. He would watch the flames, feeling a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. He had once thought solitude was the only path to freedom. Now he knew that true freedom included love, connection, and the courage to open one's heart. And in that simple, profound realization, the cowboy found the life he had never dared to imagine. A life filled with warmth, laughter, and the steady presence of a family that he would protect and cherish for all his days. The plains were still vast, still wild, but they no longer felt lonely. They were alive with hope, love, and the promise of a future that would forever be shared.